Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Chatting the Pictures. My name is Cara Finnegan, and I'm a writer, teacher, and historian of photography.
And I'm Michael Shaw. I'm a psychologist, a writer, and a publisher of Reading the Pictures.
All right, Michael, we have some cool and diverse images today. I'm really excited to share them with everybody.
Yeah, I think there's this like special harmonic convergence that happened this week with the circle.
Yes.
Or we could just call this the Eiffel edition.
Yes. And folks will very quickly see exactly what you're alluding to there.
Yeah.
Why don't we dive on in?
Yep.
If you've been watching us for a while, you know that we have three segments in each episode. In the first segment, we call the news, where we ask questions about how news photos tell stories. And here is this week's news photo.
And the credit goes to the Event Horizon Telescope collaboration versus via the National Science Foundation. And the caption is the first image of a black hole from the galaxy Messier 87. This black hole resides 55 million light years from Earth and has a mass 6.5 billion times that of the sun. So, this and our last image went completely viral this week. So just was seen by everybody and it's been discussed quite a bit.
Yeah, when I bent over this morning in the driveway to pick up my paper edition of the New York Times, this little guy was staring right up at me from above the fold. So I have to do a quick shout out. I work at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and some of my colleagues across campus actually worked on a part of this project. Some folks in astronomy and physics, they worked on the theory part. And so one of the things that points to is, to me, one of the interesting things about this image is that we need to think of it as an image by algorithm. This is not an image that you just snap a photo and get. It's an image that's constructed. The only way to get an image of the black hole, as I understand it, would be to have a telescope the size of the Earth. And since that's pretty impossible, at least right now, what this large group of, I think, 200 collaborators did was, one of the things they did was they said, let's use 6 different telescopes and then put together all the data and determine what algorithms would produce kind of one image from all of these data. And so this idea of image by algorithm is really interesting to me because, images always invite us to think about their construction, and literally this image is a kind of black box image in the sense that it was created by an algorithm that is not obviously visible to us as we look at it.
Yeah, the photojournalism world snark was this would never qualify for a World Press Photo Award because it's a composite. It's against the rules.
Yes, all that digital manipulation, right? And people are building their careers and they're building theory, and they're teaching us how to understand the universe through this digital manipulation. And I find that really interesting. But that's interesting because the photojournalism response, the snark, hits on another point that I wanted to make, which is, and even the scientists say this, it kind of looks like what we thought they would look like, what science fiction has always told us they look like. So the news is big news, but the image itself, while really interesting, is also kind of like, yeah, I feel like I've seen that before, So again, scientists love this because it confirms the theory, right? And the way that they've theorized how they would look turns out to be pretty, correct. But yet the image itself, is maybe a little bit underwhelming in that kind of visual drama sense.
Yeah. By the way, the algorithm, if I understand it right, was if we're talking about photo credits, was the algorithm was also developed. And the event team was led by a woman. So
in the imaging group. Yep.
But,
and somebody, not only a woman, but someone who is a graduate student who's beginning her first faculty job this fall. So that's a pretty nice way to walk onto campus and be like, yeah, black hole, that's me.
Another tie-in to generational change and maybe our last photograph today, but I think what was really interesting about this is like how it just took off visually but I'm not sure, like, but I'm not sure, like, people, like, got into it conceptually. It's very ironic and hard to wrap your head around, the presence of absence, visualizing, like, the point of no return, the heart of darkness, the essence of nothing. And then when you think about that visually, I think people actually are relating to this more in terms of the circle and the comfort we get from the circle, and then the orange glow, the actual, what looks like the warmth of it, where I think people would relate to this, might be related to this more almost like a solar eclipse, so that it's really like the sun underneath there, as opposed to what we've got is the ultimate depiction of nothing.
Yeah, and even there too, like in the context of science imaging, it's not read in quote unquote real life if we could get out there, which would, that's a whole other kind of mind-blowing set of configurations. But the area, the imaged area around the black, the black hole, right? The black part of the black hole is essentially created as a way to indicate what that event horizon looks like, what that point of no return is. So when you're in the red zone or the orange zone, right, that's when you're not ever coming out. And I love that idea too, because again, it sort of points to the idea that to understand something conceptually, scientifically, you actually need to make it look like not how it really looks, so that people can understand the science. But then there's also this kind of beauty and kind of mythical element to that, that choice of the yellow and the red and the orange also.
Yeah, and very quickly, last week you were talking about, the element of time and, like, what it means to see a particular picture at a particular moment. And I'm wondering, like, why this, like, was this, virality, why this, like, took off so intensely yesterday. And I'm thinking about it, against the background of, our climate crisis and the threat to our planet. And I don't know if, like, the rise of authoritarianism and all that, but at least the planetary crisis, and, the interest in this was so intense. And maybe the fact that there's so little consensus around the fact that our planet is in crisis. This is this kind of need to know the unknowable. It's like, this intensely Cartesian, response to this thing yesterday. I think, we all kind of need some soothing right now.
Yeah, and there's
around not knowing.
Yeah, and there's something too about that idea, I think, of collaboration. The idea that kind of one person can't do it alone, right? That there literally are hundreds of people and ideas, and everyone has a part of the story. I mean, I really think that's a part of it too. Again, that and to get back to what you said earlier, that idea of the circle, I think somehow gets at that as well. That to have the full sense of whatever we might be facing and needing in terms of that soothing, we need kind of everybody on board.
Yeah, and it's really crazy how people, like, just conflated this image with the next one. If we just jump, to the to Trump and the eyeball. I mean, it's like so many memes where they combine the two.
Yeah. So here's the look. Literally, we talk about this in terms of how does an image push the visual boundaries to illuminate a story or idea. And honestly, the first note I made when I was looking through our edit was freaky. Like, this is freaky.
It is freaky. You need a psychologist to explain this one.
Yes, please explain. Happily, we have one right here.
Well, it was taken by Pablo Martinez Monsiváis for AP. And the caption reads, "Members of the media are seen reflected in the eye of President Trump as he answers questions on the South Lawn of the White House in Washington, Wednesday, April 10th, before boarding Marine One helicopter, blah, blah, blah." And just, I guess, shameless plug in a way, I did a post, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, on these crazy images and scenes of this on the South Lawn, because these Friday afternoons when Trump leaves town, that's the only time that you see any consistent interaction between Trump and reporters. And the reporters are starting to do like very interesting and strange things with those photographs, almost to do like kind of nonverbal commentary on, you know, this kind of not normal relationship in these times we live in. So this is, every week now, it seems like the photographers have kind of latched onto this and are depicting this, you know, doing stranger things. So this was the latest.
Yeah, and you know, I mean,
another black hole.
Another black hole, a black and white hole, right? For sure. And I mean, there's, wow, right? One of the things, this photo, I think, you know, we live in the era of the Instagram square now. And so much so that sometimes when you're looking at a news image, you have to go figure out, wait, is this the Instagram version? Did it get squared off? Is there something else in it, right? In another version. And to me, it's the combination of the Instagram square and the black and white that make this a really visually compelling and if freaky photo, because I don't know that you would see, because of, you know, the black hole of the pupil, I don't know that you would see the reflection in the same way if you saw this image in color. I could be wrong. It'd be interesting to see that. And so I feel like the black and white is necessary to literally see what is in his eye. And then again, just that notion of the Instagram square, you know, I mean, you know, I think the kind of metaphor, right, that you pointed out on Twitter with this image is, you know, like the media is on his mind, right? It's in his eye. And you see just the squareness draws you right into the middle. And it's like, it's literally to the heart of Trump. Everything he sees and thinks about is how he is being reflected in the media. And so this kind of reflects back on that. And so to me, that square component of the Instagram style, if you will, and the black and white, like really sell this as, you know, that kind of, like you said, that kind of Friday afternoon meditation on the South Lawn.
Yeah, this is the tweet that we did read. We've often talked about the symbiotic relationship between Trump and the press. What the photo stunningly illustrates is how much their focus on him and his pathological need for everything to go through him is internalized. And this is what's brilliant about this photograph. And I think that the photography is just getting better, and these photographers are getting better, and the culture is getting more, you know, savvy about photography. So you can do things that are this sophisticated. And so what he's actually doing is rendering a psychological process, not a unhealthy one, a pathological one, where Trump internalizes this, his point of view, and he internalizes this craving for attention and to be able to command attention. And Monsiváis rendered it, and in a way that you like can see it happen at a physical, psychological process like that happen at the physical level. And it's really like, it's stunning to me.
And you know, that again, that notion of that kind of internal, that internalizing and that notion of control. So if you look at the reflection of the group of media assembled there, it appears to me as though there's some kind of a rope line.
Yes,
cutting, you know, like they're behind a rope line, probably shouting questions and taking pictures, right? And so the element of that to me is really interesting too, and I think it points to what you're suggesting about this notion of control, that he sort of has them where he wants them if they both have to assemble because he wants to control the conversation. And you know, he might say something and they have to be there, but at the same time, it's this control, right? It's the sense of he doesn't really want them all up in his stuff. He wants to be able to navigate that on his own terms. And again, I think that just that little kind of slash across his eye to me really hits that idea home even more.
Yeah, it's like control. It really is like that is bounded even inside of the pupil. It's and what it also does too is it in terms of us being the reporters, and this is true in real life, that they become a reflection of us. This shows how much too, like we've all kind of adapted to it, you know, but if you remember back to like that first week and 2 weeks and 3 weeks, and you know, we are trapped in this abusive relationship with this guy. We are trapped in his head, and he like there's only the way he perceives things. It's crazy. And that phrase, are you going to believe me or your own eyes? I mean, this is also the embodiment of an abusive relationship where we are witnessing, how we're trapped in there. It's really genius. It's painful, but it's really smart.
And I wonder. I mean, this is so peculiar to Trump, but yet it's not. And I wonder if there's a way to think of this image as having something broader to say about the relationship between presidents and the media more generally. Is it kind of allegorical in that way? And to the extent that there's always this question and always this tension, and every president, that tension is animated in different ways, and certainly in every new media context with the demands of whatever the newest demands are on the Washington media, but it's always playing out regardless of who's president. So part of me looks at this and thinks, is this everybody, right? At the same time, as it's also so peculiar to this moment and made possible by the fact that photojournalists are really creatively working kind of the edges of this moment and trying to find a visual way into this guy.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that are particular to Trump and Trump's psychology with a picture like this, but I think your point's really well taken, because if you think about the genius of Sousa and also the fact that once social media came into the world, they could kind of run the table in terms of controlling the visual narrative. You could have the same thing with Obama's pupil, and a lot of the points you just made would be just as relevant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. Shall we move on to our last image? It is, as Michael kind of teased early on, it's kind of the week of the circle. And we'll see how that plays out with the pick, which is our final segment, where we take a closer look at what kinds of images seem to be the ones that get a lot of public traction. And here's this week's photo.
Yeah, and this was taken by Lana Haroun. The caption reads, this photograph of Allah Salah's appearance during a protest this week against President Omar al-Bashir of Sudan has swept through social media. Interesting caption, in terms of talking about like the relevance of it being how relevant it was. And then just to add one note, as people have been watching the news closely know, is that al-Bashir was ousted today. So, and then I'll just add, and then Allah Salah is a 22-year-old engineering and architecture student, and her mother, I just read this morning, her mother's actually a fashion designer who specializes in these tubes that she's wearing. So this is so drenched in symbolism. I'll let you like run with it and then, throw in
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really interesting about viral imagery is the way that, to use the term that, the term of art that's currently circulated, the way explainers emerge in the context of social media to help you interpret, right, news events, or in this case, news image. So almost as soon as this image starts to circulate virally, we get the explainer. And so the explainers in the context of visual culture help us kind of decode the symbolism, particularly the cultural symbolism that would kind of inherently or more naturally have resonance with people in Sudan, but not necessarily outside of it.
You're talking about the explainer threads?
Yeah, the explainer threads.
Fabulous.
Yeah, the New York Times did a whole story that was actually by their, I think their fashion critic, kind of laying out the dynamics of her clothing. And, so the short version of that is that this is a kind of clothing that not a lot of, that contemporary women, younger women would not wear, but that would resonate with older women, particularly women who were involved in protests in Sudan in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So it's a kind of throwback or a callback, I think was the term someone used, to earlier times of protests, which apparently historically in Sudan have been led by women. And so women have been key public figures. So a young woman, right, a kind of generational change, but yet adopting and kind of referencing history in the dress, her jewelry. That circle, I guess we could say, the circle of this image is apparently traditional wedding jewelry. That very bright earring that is catching the light and really calls our attention to her face.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so you've got. You've got these kind of cultural elements of dress, but then you've got the body posture, right? And, when we think about what makes an image like this go viral, in a context where the vast majority of people have no idea what's going on in Sudan, it's that combination of symbolism and then the body posture and the gesture. And so here we have a very specific kind of cultural context with this visual symbolism, this bodily gesture that reflects. People have made references to the Statue of Liberty. They've made references to the Marianne, the statue in Paris. So this idea of images of women in freedom, is cued very much. And then also finally, just that the raised finger, that notion of speaking out. So there is a kind of, to really Westernize or Americanize an image that maybe shouldn't necessarily be, there is a kind of Me Too narrative that I think this image is implicitly picking up on as well, this idea of empowering women and women speaking out and protesting.
Yeah, back to the thread and then the symbolism there. What was really cool to me was that there was a woman, her name was Hind Maki, Hindmacci, who did the first thread, and I think probably it was so early. She was probably one of the first people to start to get the chain going in terms of the virality of this. And her thread was just fascinating because she really did go through the symbolism in so much depth, about the garment as being, a democratic garment, and, the women in white and the protest movement now with using white in connection to, the ancient Nubian queens and how these earrings are passed down through the generations. And, and I think that's what's really interesting is I think this picture on one level, just like when we mentioned who kind of organized the Black Hole Project, I think this picture is very much about gender and generational change. And I think that as much as you get these kind of authoritarian forces and the white men, and we're seeing this kind of real tension now, and it's exploding in different places in different moments. And certainly that was catalyzed around pictures. And so this is very much about that, that kind of generational change. But the other thing,
and I just, on that point too, I was going to say, on that point too, that notion of generational change, it's also a kind of extra institutional moment, right? Or maybe the not relying on institutions. So, not only are they, protesting the institutions in the nation, but so Lana Haroun, the photographer who made this photograph with her iPhone, and you see all the phones in the around the whole image, but especially that kind of shower scattering of phones in the foreground. Recorded a short video where she talked a little bit about having made the image, and it's very brief, and she sort of basically makes a point people need to pay attention to actually what's happening in Sudan, and that's part of what the video does. But she also says there's no journalists here, and she kind of implies that it's not super safe to walk around with the camera. And so part of it is the sense of this image goes viral, arguably globally, in a context where there aren't necessarily, at least according to her, there's not a kind of journalistic narrative in, kind of chronicling the protest. And so that to me was really interesting too, because it just cues this sense of, well, we all have our iPhones. We can record this and make sure it gets out. And we don't necessarily need the institutions of, traditional media. But there was also a sense of maybe journalists should be paying attention to what's happening here. And so I found that a really kind of compelling element too. And then visually that argument, I think, just plays out in, that I don't see a quote unquote regular digital camera in the mix here. I see a lot of people holding up phones.
Also, I think that if you go back to the Arab Spring, and this connotes that in different ways, that was really oh my God, people were discovering in the moment that social media could convey this kind of populist and worldwide impact and meaning. But this, at this point, I think in some way shows a maturity around that. That first, the woman's mother is a designer. She had to have been aware. She designs these garments, so she's aware of like the fact that you action them in your movements. The way she's positioned there and the way that the disc is glowing like that. There's a sophistication now, both in terms of the actors, quote unquote, and then also in terms of the population and the audience, where there's nothing like surprising anymore that this is going to go online and go everywhere. That's sort of the point now, and that's why I think this is such a fabulous image, because in some way it says that protest and social media and it is beyond the media, and there's a lot of sophistication around it, and it's kind of grown up.
Yeah, I think that point about maturity is really interesting for sure, and it does. It's social movements used to stage media events to get the attention of the media, and now they provide their own attention. Yeah.
And then the media gets it after the fact and just documents the fact in that caption, that it's not just this uprising, but it's like this image and then the virality of it. I mean, that's chasing the story.
Yeah. But it may then provide the coverage that people there would hope would be there all along, right? And there's a whole other conversation to be had about the lack of Western and certainly U.S.
but they
coverage.
Close the loop. They don't open it. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Wow. What a week. Oh, this is what happened last week. Cara dropped out, so I know that she can still see us, and so it also says that we need to be doing a little research on our technology. So I'll close for both of us. Thank you so much for joining us. It was quite an eyeful this week, as we said. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and our website, Reading the Pictures. We'll see you again next week. Thanks a lot. Take care.